So we heard in the reading that Sally read for us today thoughts about the Buddhist practice of right speech, which is a hard enough one if you've ever tried it. And a Buddhist teacher that I really appreciate named Sylvia Borstein has a practice she uses in classroom settings to kind of counter that notion of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, which is ridiculous, as most of you know. And to point that out, she has people in the classroom setting often stop, and I won't ask you to do this today, but maybe you can imagine doing this. She looks into the classroom and she says, if you've broken a bone in your life, raise your hand. And then she says, if that break still hurts, keep your hand raised. And almost every hand goes down. And then she says, if you hurt because of something someone said to you in the last year, raise your hand. And every hand in the room goes up. She says, if that's still hurting, keep your hand raised. Most of the hands are still raised. And then she says, if that's something from 5 years ago, keep your hand raised. Most of the hands are raised. She goes on to 10 years, 15 years, 25 years, and she says almost always a large percentage of the hands are still raised, but by this point everyone's kind of looking at their neighbor and laughing sheepishly and giggling. But she says to her it's a testament of the potency of our words and the effect that they have on our lives and our sense of shared humanity. Now, it's not just the Buddhists who have recognized that words are holy tools. If you read the Hebrew Scriptures, the first chapter of the first book in Genesis says that God created the universe in an act of speech. It wasn't done with physicality. It wasn't done by taking parts of things that already existed, putting together. The writers of this poetic narrative said that God created the world by speaking. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God said, let them be created in our image, and they were, etc., etc. In the Christian scriptures, some of them at least, even use the Greek word logos, word, to refer to God and the person of Jesus in their understanding. In John's book, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, it says. And then look at any Protestant church you've ever been to, this one included. If you go to the churches in New England, the Unitarian Universalist churches there with their history, you can tell what that church thinks is important by looking at the architecture of the room. There's not a big altar where the sacrifice happens. There's a huge pulpit. What's important in that history? There it is, yeah. Words, the word, the word, the word. You can tell with us because we talk a lot. But for us, our image of God that we've held since our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors began framing it as such was never just a clockmaker or watchmaker God who took care of a lot of things a long time ago and then let things be. Or neither was this image of God kind of a puppet master who was constantly pulling strings and we had no free will. No, ours was an image of an emergent, creative, evolutionary web where we are co-creators of the world to come. Where the holy, the divine sources of life, when they build something new, often do it through us, or with us, and sometimes despite us. But our theology has said we are co-creators of the world, that we bear this tremendous responsibility of having a part in building a world that is either more just or less just. And one of the primary tools in our toolbox is our speech. Maybe in our toolbox, our words aren't the hammer, but they're at least a Phillips head screwdriver. We're going to use them a lot. They're one of the primary tools we use. And when I listened to Maysoon Zayed's presentation and watched it, I think people could have come away with a lot of different conclusions. It was rich, and if you haven't seen the entire video, and I encourage you to find it online. She talks about the many identities we wear and how they sometimes separate us from others. She talks about physical disabilities. She up front names all of these realities that often keep us from witnessing the full humanity of someone. In her comedic way, she says if there was an oppression Olympics, she would win. She says, I'm Palestinian, I'm a woman, I'm Muslim, I have cerebral palsy, and I live in New Jersey. Gosh, I wish Daniel was here today to see that joke. But what she does up front is name the many ways that labels and words and speech are used to separate us from the full humanity of someone else. And I think that one of the most important things she does in that talk, the thing that stood out to me the most, comes right at the beginning when she says, I have cerebral palsy, which means I shake all the time. And then she stops and says to the group, look. And then just stands there for a moment, inviting them to see the fullness of who she is. That's what I took away from her talk. Look. And she makes this connection between the words we use and what she thought was possible in her only life. She says that her dad taught her to walk when she was 5 years old, and that his mantra that he would repeat to her all the time was, you can do it, yes you can, and that he would say that over and over and over. And now she makes a living with her words. She's a part of an Arab American comedy festival that formed after 9/11 to show a different understanding of who Arab Americans were. She's part of a worldwide tour called Arabs Gone Wild that's also a comedy tour. But one of the things I thought was most interesting, and I know we could have come away with a lot of different takes on her talk. Accessibility, how we understand labels, positive images of disability in the media. There were a lot of things, but what spoke to me this week was when she connected the words she heard in her life or could have heard with what she thought was possible in her own body. She says that growing up as a child and as an adult, she was never actually made fun of, contrary to what most people would say. Not for who she was and her ethnicity or her physical ability, but it was only when social media comments on websites came up that people started using words in a way that would diminish her physical abilities. She said she would have these videos of her online and then look in the comments section and see those things said. And I made the mistake of reading the comments section of the YouTube video of her presentation, which includes many of the very things that she had said have been said about her. What was interesting, I thought, is that she said, here I am today, accomplishing all this. I've been in movies and television, worldwide comedy tours. She said, I do yoga now, and I was a stand-up comic who couldn't stand, and now I can stand on my head, she says. But I don't know if I would have been able to do any of it had I grown up in an era of social media where I saw the kind of things I've seen said. I don't think that's a condemnation of social media. I think what it is her saying, pay attention. All of us have this tremendous capacity to use our speech in a way that honors the full humanity of another person, or to use those words in a way that builds a wall between us. Look. Look, she says. Now, in the reading, this guy, Michael Stusser, takes on this month-long experiment of the Buddhist practice of right speech. And he's an interesting candidate for the practice. He's a comedy writer online who says that being snarky and dismissive of other people is part of his job description. He says it starts to creep into his day-to-day life. And so he takes this practice on, and what you don't hear is he was also going through a divorce, beginning of a divorce, taking on the practice of right speech, which he said is a terrible idea. And in it, he goes to his yoga teacher and a Tibetan Buddhist monk. He says, I had to hire the big guns to do this practice right. And they give him a practice you're probably familiar with. You've probably seen it online or heard about it or seen little summarized versions on Facebook. The Buddhist practice of right speech that he's given includes 4 gates of speech. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it necessary? And is it kind? That's hard. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And he's told to wear a visible reminder of this practice. He chooses a little mood ring. And at the end of it, he ends up saying he thought this was going to be something he could joke around about or write stories about online, and it turns out to be this profoundly affecting practice in his life. So I picked it up again this week as a discipline. It's one I've tried before, but in preparing for this sermon, I tried to take the advice of wearing a little visible reminder. So I've got a little rubber band. It's the first thing I saw on my desk when I thought about it. So I put this little rubber band on my arm and have been using it as a reminder of the right speech practice this week. It's a handy thing. If you don't do it, you can give yourself a little pop, and the people around you can tell your success by how red my wrist was on some days. But I found it interesting, the reactions I got from other people when they asked me, what's that rubber band doing around your wrist? And I would say, well, I'm engaging in this intentional practice of right speech. And so many people immediately went, why would you ever want to do that? Somebody said, that's not going to be any fun. And one person that I work with, and I don't know what this says about me, but one person I work with said, well, how am I going to trust anything you're saying, to be honest, over the next week? If every time before you speak you're asking, is this true? Is this helpful? Is this necessary? Is this kind? One of the things I discovered this week, and I've done this practice before, but one of the things I discovered is that this practice infused every waking hour of my life. When I'm trying to meditate in the mornings, when it's no longer the morning, I don't have to worry about meditating. When I'm engaged in mindful eating, I do it while I'm eating. There was not a moment in my human interactions in which this wasn't hanging over my head or helping me. Both of those, it felt like both of those sometimes. It was ever present. And I found very quickly that my speech often related to human beings, and often to whether they were measuring up or not. So interesting to pay attention to that. And I noticed that this powerful tool, the one that ancient writers said literally created the world, the one that our Christian ancestors said was representative of God on earth, this powerful tool that can affect our lives, for me, seemed to be on autopilot almost all the time. I would notice that I'd been speaking for a few minutes and didn't realize I was talking, until I looked down and saw this rubber band on my wrist and went, okay, slow down. Every waking hour related to this practice. And this powerful tool that shapes worlds and lives appeared to be automatic. And this past week, I had the opportunity to engage in a public justice act at an immigration reform rally hosted by Dallas Area Interfaith. And when I was there, it occurred to me once again that the way that we speak to, with, and about one another has social implications. This isn't just whether the person sitting across from me feels good about themselves. We're building the world we live in with the words we use. I was invited to give the opening remarks at this rally for immigration reform, and the person who invited me said, well, why don't you try and speak in Spanish if you can do it? And I'm kind of an intermediate Spanish speaker, but I said, okay, this is worth the risk. I'll give it a shot this time. And so it was the first time I had ever, in a public setting, spoken in Spanish. I was absolutely terrified, and nothing makes you more mindful of the words you're using than having to literally translate every one of them. And I agonized over getting each word right, and I can still tell you the words I messed up. The word riesgo, for risk, I couldn't get right. I don't know why. I stood in the pulpit, and I watched something change in my ability to be present for the other human beings in the room. Now, simply speaking another language isn't right speech. I know that. But what I saw in that moment is that literally just changing the words I used helped build a bridge to the experience of another person's humanity that I don't think would have been there in the same way. And over the course of the night, and then in reading the newspaper articles about it the next day and the comments section of the newspaper articles, don't do that, there's never any wisdom there, I realized that that same thing is true, that Maysoon Zayed mentioned. That behind the cover of either the anonymity of the internet or the wall that exists between my neighborhood and others in the city, it's so easy to use my words in a way that don't affirm the full humanity of another person. Now, whatever you think about the laws surrounding immigration, we have a wide variety of political opinion in this congregation. That's a good thing. But it stood out to me that we must be mindful about the effects of what it means to have the primary label for a group of millions of human beings. The primary adjective that we use in the media is the word illegal. I wondered what effect that has on our patterns of thought. The stories that I heard about children living in unsafe conditions because their parents couldn't call a landlord, or people having their wages stolen because they couldn't seek legal counsel, or people working all days, a full day in the hot Texas sun without a work break. I wondered about the implications of us using one of our primary adjectives for a group of millions of human beings as illegal. So in Maysoon Zayed's talk, what stood out most to me is that she connected her own understanding of what was possible in her one and only life to the words that other human beings spoke around her. You can do it. Yes, you can, her dad said. I'm not sure this was a talk about overcoming adversity, although that was a part of it. She says, look. Her call is to witness the full humanity of other human beings, and says the habits of our words will either make us more able to do that or less able to do that. Now, I don't think that simply putting a ring or a little thing around your wrist and asking yourself, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it necessary or kind, is going to radically change the entire world the minute you start to practice. But I know from experience that it shined a light on the habits that I continually use. And it asked me, am I using one of the most powerful tools I have to meet the humanity of another human being, or to walk away from it? And so my challenge to you in this week and the weeks ahead is to ask yourself what tools you are using as a co-creator of the world we are building. To be mindful of your speech and its power. To think of how long your hand would be raised in the air if you were exercising this public witness of the power of words. And to ask if the speech you use is building beloved community on earth or keeping it from being born. Best of luck. We will need it. And amen.